Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Experience Kills. I am your host Ben, and with me today is my other host, which is fair to say, Cameron.
Hello, I'm the other host, and that's fair to say.
Why did you just repeat everything? What was that? Why did you just repeat that?
I don't know, for the fun of it.
That was really weird. We're here to talk about I'd say it's a little indie game, but a well-polished indie game from Espanol, from Spain, from Madrid actually. Rico Technology, based in Madrid, have made 1971 Project Helios, which is a turn-based tactical combat game, kind of in the XCOM vein, set in an alternative 1971, in which, you know, you kind of move your dudes around the map and kill baddie dudes and have a kind of a cool story of sort of unravel as you go. And both me and Cameron have played this. Cameron has played it on PlayStation, I have played it on Xbox. And Cam, I'm curious, how have you enjoyed 1971 Project Helios?
Well, I found it a damn sight easier than XCOM. I mean,
that's really interesting because I was the opposite.
Really?
But go on. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I didn't find with XCOM it's a lot of like base management and squad management, you know. And I'm terrible at that sort of thing. But like the combat and the turn-based strategy part, I feel like I do quite well. But I felt like there wasn't too what's the word I want to use? It wasn't overly complicated, you know. And that's what I kind of liked about Project Helios. It's difficult gameplay sometimes.
Yeah,
you have to position your combatants in certain ways, because some will obviously have like a higher health pool compared to others. But at the same time, though, obviously once you kind of got that knack down, it's, you know, you build up your skills quite easily, I found.
So for me, the reason I found it more difficult was one particular thing. So in Project Helios, your squad are all named characters in the narrative of the game. So you have one of them die and it's game over, start again on that combat environment. Whereas in XCOM, the point of XCOM is that while you do create emotional attachment to your characters in that game, they're all kind of randomly generated and they're not dependent on the story. So when they die in combat, that's it, you just keep going. They're dead, or you can try and or you can revive them or something or whatever. What I did notice is when the game is quite hard with the onboarding, it actually gets a bit easier as you go along. Once you start discovering and understanding the resource of Fulgor, which is this kind of heating thing in the world, because in 1971 Project Helios, by the way, I really like the title of this game, which is why I keep saying it. In the game, it's kind of like a frozen world that you're in, and basically heat management is a big element of this. And the Fulgor is a thing that you can use to do a few things. You can actually use it to heat yourself if you're exposed out in the freezing tundra. You can also use it to sort of decrease cooldown times on certain moves and abilities of your characters. But the most important bit is you can revive fallen characters in combat. Once they've gone down, you can bring them back using Fulgor if you have enough of the resource. But in the beginning of the game, you don't have Fulgor, so I just found myself having to redo battles like at sometimes 5-6 times, because for some reason, I found that unless you did a combat encounter in a very specific way, you would lose. The enemies
it's like
always...
a puzzle.
Yeah, it's a bit more like a puzzle. It's less like XCOM in that regard. It's not so much emergent. The enemies are actually quite predictable in what they do. They almost always focus on the weakest enemy, the weakest combatant you've got, I should say. They'll focus on them, which in many ways makes sense. It's also quite hard to understand sometimes the amount of damage the enemy will do to you with a successful attack and you will do to them, because there's quite a few like armor mechanics and health mechanics, and I didn't find it was particularly well explained during gameplay. There are tutorial elements that you can read when you're in like the camp environments between missions, but it wasn't really explained to me how armor affects health and all of that, and how it can like withstand certain attacks better, and how different types of enemies will do different types of damage and stuff like that. And I found that was a bit poorly explained. I mean, I got it through gameplay and through trial and error, but a game like this kind of, when you've got so many visual cues, especially when it comes to like hit percentages and stuff like that, I would have thought that sort of element of the gameplay would be explained better. But hey, it's okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Cameron, is did you ever have a hit percentage that wasn't 100% or 50%? Because they're the only ones I ever saw when playing the game. You'd either hit them or have a 50% chance of hitting them.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get it, obviously, because they're either in like 100% cover or it's a chest-high wall, so I get it, but no, I don't think I ever saw anything less than that.
Because it's weird. That's weird to me because in XCOM you have a percentage bar, right, out of 100%, and it goes anywhere in there because it's affected by things like cover and range and positioning, and all kinds of different status effects will affect the likelihood of an impact. But I only saw 50% and 100% in Project Helios, which was kind of odd to me. Like, why bother having it as a percentage if you could visually represent that in a very different way, couldn't you? That was very easy to understand.
Yeah, it is one of those things where, like you said, they do tend to aim for some of the weakest people. I mean, I quite like the combat and that kind of puzzle aspect of it. I enjoy those kind of like strategy cover games.
Me too.
So it's always a case of like, weak person, right, find them the closest bit of 100% cover they can get,
Yeah.
But I can understand that, well, at most times at least anyway, that it can either be a 50 or 100%, because it's not as if you're fighting and shooting from 200 meters away from each other or anything like that.
Yeah, it's close quarters mostly.
Yeah, it is close quarters most of the time. So I can kind of forgive them for that, but it's the sort of thing where, like, okay, I will move this guy to the back of the room and he still gets hit, and you're just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I couldn't always work out the angles. Like, you'd look at an enemy and go, well, he can't hit from there. There's just no way, because there's stuff in the way, and that doesn't make sense. And then he'd hit you, and you'd be like, what? How did he...
Yeah, it's not 100% clear either, is it? Because, like, there's an area earlier on in the laboratory area, do you remember? Mm-hmm. Where there's a lot of, like, there's kind of laboratory desks and everything like that, but they have, like... kind of like shelving it on top of the desks as well, and it looks like a unit, but it still only gave you half, 50% cover. And I'm just like, I'm on the end here, and there is actually something I am like standing against. Why don't I have 100% cover here? You know?
It's the frustration of this type of game. Like, I remember I had one guy with a shotgun who was 2 tiles away from an enemy, right? And it didn't look to me like he was in cover at that point, but it gave me only the 50% hit chance, and then I went for it and missed. And you're like, that is frustrating, because you're like, how you have a double barrel shotgun. How could you miss from there? That literally makes no sense. And what you're doing there is you taking the mechanics and putting it over the logic of the actual environment, which is kind of annoying. But it is what you get with this type of game. You kind of just have to accept that. It's just sometimes you just roll the dice and you miss. But the other thing I found weird was because a lot of the combat is in these small environments. The melee characters were by far my favourite characters to use, because they were often really beefy, could take a lot of damage, and they would just hit things, which was very enjoyable. I really liked the focus on them, but there wasn't that many of them. There's like one in a squad usually. But the other thing I found weird was there is an Overwatch mechanic in this game, but because you're in such close environments usually, Overwatch doesn't make a lot of sense, because there'll be times when everybody would activate it and then nobody would move. So it's kind of like, well, what's the point of having Overwatch if you can't... And I never felt like I could effectively flush enemies out of cover either. Like, there's the grenades and stuff in this game. And you think, if you throw the grenade, maybe the enemy will try and get away from it. That's not how they work. They just do direct damage. So, like, how do I draw enemies out of cover so that they can then get hit by Overwatch? It's really tricky to do. It's not very obvious. And because the rooms are so tight and the combat is often in these very, very close environments, that... it just doesn't even make sense half the time to move at all. You can just sort of take pot shots from basically where you start half the time, especially with the grenade guy and whatnot. You can just lob them all over the place.
Yeah, the only way that I could find that they never come out of cover is if you have most of your team in 100% cover, so they can't hit you whatsoever. Then they'd have to come and actually attempt to shoot you. You basically have to hide your guys almost to try and do it. But then it's almost like, well, what's the point of Overwatch? Like, in this game, it's almost like they've put it in there because people would expect it in an XCOM-like game, but it doesn't have a lot of like
tactical reason to use, whereas in XCOM you're constantly relying on it, because if you don't use Overwatch, you're screwed basically in that game. Whereas in this, I did find, like you mentioned, it's more of a puzzle game than an action strategy game kind of thing, or an action tactics game. It frustrated me sometimes because there'd be quite often, pretty much every combat encounter, you're outnumbered, and that's how they balance it. But if you don't play it quite right, you're often going to be in a lot of trouble. I thought one of the things that was quite interesting was that unless you make a point of killing an enemy in a turn, you don't do anything to affect their effectiveness in the next turn. So I was always basically just playing the numbers game of, right, I need to make sure if I've got a squad of 4 guys, these 2 guys go after this guy and these 2 guys go after this guy, because that way I can pretty much guarantee I'll kill them. Because if I don't kill them, they're just gonna F me up, because their numbers are always in their favor. So it's quite tricky in that regard. Tell you something I did like. I like the fact that in the levels, you'd go between multiple combat encounters. A level wasn't just one combat encounter. You'd then get all your health back and everything, and you'd do a bit of exploring. There's things to find in the world, like documents, and then you'd get into another combat room. And I thought that was cool, because XCOM isn't like that. In XCOM, it's all combat.
Yeah, I was quite happy that health didn't carry on over.
Yes.
Yeah, God.
Oh, God, yeah. The amount of times I'd get out of a battle and I'd have like half a pip of health on 2 or 3 of my characters, like, because they'd all get taken down to almost nothing. And it's just like,
it's that satisfying feeling of getting out of it, and like you've got like a cube of health each, and you're just like, no, please hit this 50% shot, please. And then you get it, and then just like, oh my God, oh, finally. Sweet relief.
I know what you mean. That's what they're going for, but I didn't find myself taking a lot of shots when it was only 50%. I would usually position to guarantee 100% and just be very aggressive is what I found. You can't play very conservatively in this game, and that's something that's quite different to XCOM, because XCOM's often about positioning, hanging back, forcing enemies into Overwatch, you know, getting them that way. Whereas in this, it's much more about like running in, charging in, close range. You do have, like, because you've got a lot of guys that are melee and shotgun based, so they're all about getting in close. You do usually have a rifle guy with you, and then you have like a grenade guy or something to that effect. But yeah, I thought, I don't know, I don't think the balance is quite there in this. It didn't feel quite as polished or as as effective. Not even XCOM. I don't know. I like the world they've constructed here. I like the ideas that we have here. I just feel like the actual combat, which is what meat of the game is, it just feels a bit like uneven. Like it's a bit overly punishing in places, but also quite samey, and there's not a lot of variety, and I just don't like those incredibly tight combat rooms that you find yourself in when it's your 4 dudes and 6 enemies in like a room that's only like, I don't know, like 20 by 20 squares. It's like, man, you're just on top of each other, aren't you? It doesn't give you a lot of tactical options.
Yeah, a lot of the places, they barely had like 100% cover for you anyway. A lot of them, you can have 2 people with like quite high armor, and then like 2 people with relatively low armor and health, the ones that can die quite easily, and like 1 piece of 100% cover, and you're just like, really?
Yeah, that's frustrating. It's like you have to accept taking damage in this game constantly, and clearly the mechanic is you're gonna get people down, you're gonna have to use your full gore resource to like bring them back, and it's not how I enjoy playing these games. I'd much rather play a tactical game like this and like play it so that you never get hit once and you decimate the enemy. And that means you've done it well. You know what I mean? That means you've effectively used your tools. Where in this game, it's much more like, no, you're going to get effed up, and it's about survival, and it's about coming out of those combat rooms with just limping along, basically, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's kind of puts emphasis on the fact that it is during this frozen world with, every day is a slow crawl to survival. It does kind of put that little, if you're looking at it that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah,
I think it does kind of work for this game though.
Yeah, it does. It does lead into that tone. The tone that the lore is in 1942. The world froze, and there was no more sun, and it's basically something went down, and that means technology-wise, it's sort of this strange extrapolation of World War II tech. You know, there's not been a huge amount of development in it, and you know, there's a lot of grizzled kind of like Ruskies and characters and European type characters, French characters and stuff, and in the game. And I like the European feel of the game. I like it does have a tone to that's different. I liked how the story is presented. I liked how when you have those bits at the campfire between the missions, you can get to like find out more about the characters and the story and the lore and stuff, and you know, have a little break before you go into the next big mission. I would have maybe liked a little bit more when it came to like, I would have liked any customization of my characters. That would have been nice. Loadouts and things like that. Whereas you just get what you get basically in this, unlike XCOM. But I think for a small developer, you know, European developer, indie game, price to reflect that, you know, not nowhere near a full price like AAA title or anything like that. I think it is interesting. I do think they does some fun stuff with the mechanics. I'd have liked, because it's kind of sold as like brutal melee combat as a focus of this. It doesn't have as much melee as I was expecting. I'd have liked maybe more of that. I quite like the rushing in with the big beefy characters and just smacking people with staffs and stuff. I think that's different for a game like this. Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
In your face.
Yeah, just enjoy this. Bam! You take off half their health, and it's like, yeah, that's cool. I maybe just like have a bit more of that. But obviously they've had to balance it out with the unit types and the mechanics and stuff like that. But I think it's pretty cool. Have you got anything you wanted to add at the end here before we wrap this up?
No. I mean, I did enjoy it. That's the main thing. I enjoyed the environment. I did like the combat. I just do like those sort of puzzle games. So yeah, I did actually really enjoy this one. And I'll probably sink a lot more time into it. See if anything changes in the end game. Awesome.
Okay, man. Cool. So that's been 1971 Project Helios. Like I said, I played it on Xbox, Cam played it on PS4. It's also out on PC, and I think probably Nintendo Switch as well. I'd have to double check that though. But yeah, it's been a cool game. It's made by a small indie developer, Rico Technology, out in Madrid in Spain. Love to see the stuff coming out of Europe. It's always interesting because it has a little bit of a different tone to it, and Helios is no different. So that's really, really good. I think it's worth checking out if you're in the mood for another kind of XCOM-esque tactical game. If you've played XCOM, you feel like something more to get into that, like on consoles. And I think it stands out with its tone and its setting more than anything at all. So yeah, check that out if you're interested. We've been Experience Kills. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I have been Ben. You can find me at DIYE. Cameron is also on Twitter at Camelot. By all means, follow Experience Kills at Experience Kills. If you've enjoyed this video, please give us a like and subscribe. We really do appreciate it. That is all we ask for. If you don't have time to watch the videos, we also put these out as audio podcasts, and they can be found basically where any good podcast can be found. But if you do need any more information about that, you can also head over to our website at experiencekills.co.uk. Is that enough information, Cam? Would you like me to give them your home phone number while we're at it?
Yeah, so that's 01483.
No, don't nobody needs to do that. He charges a premium rate. It's very exclusive service, but honestly, nobody needs that in their life.
Yeah, nobody needs that. At least I didn't give out my 0900 number.
Oh my lord. Wow. the really high end stuff. But no, until next time, keep your wrap up warm in the cold out there of Project Helios, or more accurately in the summer right now. Put your shorts on, and we'll be back soon with more video games. Goodbye.
Bye.